Today we're going to talk about Christian paranoia and how I think Christian paranoia actually hurts their witness. And we're going to talk about how Christian paranoia destroyed the perception that people have of Christians. Of course, we cannot talk about Christian paranoia without talking about the Satanic Panic. And what is the Satanic Panic, you may ask? Well, the Satanic Panic was a crazy time in the 80s where Christians and the media ran with stories about kids being sacrificially killed by satanic cults. And it was believed that these satanic cults weren't just local, that they were worldwide, and that prominent leaders were involved, from government officials to Christian leaders, and it caused so much damage to our Christian witness today because it created so much paranoia, so much fear, and so much wrongful characterization of people that we're still dealing with the effects of it today. During this time, you would have board games like Dungeons and Dragons and TV shows like He-Man, Scooby-Doo, and metal music being categorized as satanic, and that it was brainwashing the kids to adopt a satanic worldview. You also had preachers like Jimmy Swaggart calling Christian rock evil and satanic. Bands like Stryper were the main targets during this time. And just about any form of rock was considered evil. And this carried all the way up to the 90s, and even some inklings of it in the early 2000s. In the 90s, it became Marilyn Manson over the Columbine shooting. And later, parents were afraid of Harry Potter, afraid of Pokemon. It's been a number of things and has morphed over and over and over into new territories. But how did this start? It started with a book called Michelle Remembers. Michelle Remembers was a discredited book that came out in 1980 by a Canadian psychologist and his patient who eventually became his wife. The Canadian psychologist's name was Lawrence Pazder. Michelle Smith, she claimed to have suffered through a lot of ritualistic satanic abuse. Pazder was treating Smith for depression related to a miscarriage that she had. Smith had something that she wanted to tell Pazder, but she couldn't remember it. So she would have sessions that Smith would scream for 25 minutes. And then she eventually started speaking in a small 5-year-old child's voice. Over the next 14 months, Pazder would spend 600 hours using hypnosis to bring out this 5-year-old child. And when he did this, Smith would recall memories of satanic ritual abuse that occurred when she was 5 years old in 1954 through 1955 at the hands of her mother, Virginia Proby. The first ritual happened when she was 5 years old in 1954. And the last one was an 81-day ritual that happened in 1955 where Satan was summoned and that she was saved by Jesus, the Virgin Mary, and Michael, the Archangel. And they helped her heal from all this traumatic ritual abuse. According to the book, Smith was tortured, locked in cages, sexually assaulted, and she even saw some human sacrifices, from infants to adults. Later, this book was discredited by a magazine article. The magazine was called McLean's, and Paul Grusco, who interviewed Smith's father, Jack Proby, and he pretty much said he could refute all the allegations that were in the book. Mike Warnke was a Christian comedian who wrote a book in 1972 called The Satan Cellar, where he detailed his involvement in a satanic cult and all the rituals and crazy stuff he did. Warnke claimed that he was an orphan child, and that when he was a child, he was introduced to Satanism. That he engaged in sexual orgies, alcoholism, drug dealing, and that gave him an advantage to rise in the ranks of Satanism. That eventually he became a high priest, where he would be leading over all the rituals, and that he would also do magic spells, summoning demons, ritual sex, sexual assault. There was also an attempt on his life, and he had a heroin overdose that left him angry, mad at the world. He went to Vietnam and came to Christ and became an evangelist. The book ends with him living in California with his wife, Sue Stutter. This book launched his Christian career of being a Christian comedian, and he would have albums and tapes where he would tell funny jokes, but he would also tell his testimony. He would also claim that he had 2 bachelor's degree and 2 master's degree to a doctorate in philosophy. He says he was wounded twice in Vietnam, and in another book, Hitchhiking on Hope Street, he said he had been wounded 5 times. In 1985, Warnke appeared on a news report about Satanism on NBC's 2020 called The Devil Worshippers. From there, he was basically considered an expert on everything Satan and involving these ritual abuse stuff. Cornerstone magazine did an investigation on Warnke's claims and found out that they weren't true. The Cornerstone investigation had interviews with over 100 of Warnke's personal friends and acquaintances, and his ministry's tax receipts, and was found out there was a lot of deceit and fraud involved. And then after that, pictures of Warnke were shown to show that he wasn't a long fingernailed, waist-length hair dude back in the day. He was just your typical 1960s square kid, and he wasn't involved in any satanic cult of any kind. John Todd, where do I start with this guy? He can be blamed really for the Illuminati. There were books and stuff about the Illuminati before him, but he can be pretty much blamed for how popular it became. John Todd was a speaker and conspiracy theorist who claimed that he once was involved in the occult, and he was born into a family that practiced witchcraft before becoming a Christian. His stories were used by Jack Chick for his Chick tracks. Topics that would be in these tracks were against things like Dungeons and Dragons, Christian rock, and neo-paganism. Todd made claims dealing with witches, Satanists, and the Illuminati, that they had a worldwide conspiracy against Christians that included members of the government and Christian leaders. Todd claimed Jimmy Carter was the Antichrist and that Atlas Shrugged was the Illuminati blueprint. He claimed that well-known Christian figures Jim Bakker, Jerry Falwell, Billy Graham, and Bob Jones Sr., Oral Roberts, and Pat Robertson were a part of the Illuminati. He was part of the Jesus movement and would add teachings of witchcraft into Bible studies. In 1988, he was convicted in South Carolina on sexual assault charges on a grad student. He sexually molested 2 children and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Throughout his career, he has had several allegations of unwanted sexual advances and was released to an insane asylum and died in 2007. And an interesting tidbit is Todd once confronted Mike Warnke and accused Mike Warnke of stealing his testimony because they were too similar. Jack Chick promoted this man and continued to promote this man and his whole life and made this guy out to be a saint. Also during this time, you had what is known as the PMRC, the Parents Music Resource Center, was formed in 1985 by wife of Senator Al Gore, Tipper Gore, Susan Baker, wife of Treasury Secretary James Baker, Pam Hauer, wife of Washington realtor Raymond Hauer, and Sally Nevis, wife of former Washington City Council Chairman John Nevis. It grew to have 22 participants before shutting down in the 90s. They proposed a rating system be put on album covers so parents would be aware of the explicit content their kids would be listening to. They wanted stores to hide explicit album covers under the counters, pressuring TV stations to not have explicit songs or videos. They wanted to look into the contracts of musicians who performed these songs and reassess them. They created a panel to set the standards for the industry. They also had a list of songs that they felt were problematic, called the Filthy 15, which included songs by artists like Prince, Sheena Easton, Judas Priest, Vanity, Motley Crue, AC/DC, Twisted Sister, Madonna, Wasp, Def Leppard, Merciful Fate, Black Sabbath, Mary Jane Girls, Venom, and Cyndi Lauper. In 1985, 19 record companies agreed to put a parental advisory sticker on the CDs. And there were witnesses at this hearing that were musicians like John Denver, Frank Zappa, and Dee Snider. And Dee Snider was one of the definitely interesting ones to be at court because he fought back and claimed that they were really trying to censor these bands and that it was against free speech and they were allowed to express themselves the way they want to. So that's why we have the parental advisory sticker on the CDs, though I would say that it didn't really help. It actually just made it easier for kids to buy these albums because they're not supposed to have it, so they'll get it anyways, kind of thing. And it actually helped record sales, so it kind of backfired. During this time in the 80s and with the Satanic Panic, there were parents so afraid of their kid being kidnapped and taken away by a satanic cult and killed in some kind of ritual, and a lot of albums were being burned, and a lot of places were being accused of being a place for satanic rituals, even in elementary school. It was just a bunch of unnecessary paranoia that the media overhyped and Christians kept running with. And today hasn't really changed much. Not too long ago, we had the Starbucks incident with the red cups, and people were freaking out over that it didn't say Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays on it. That they were going to Starbucks and saying their name was Merry Christmas, so they put it on the mug. And the Jack Black movie called Dear Santa, where a kid that's dyslexic and accidentally misspells Santa and says Satan, and well, Satan shows up and gives this kid wishes and all his dreams. But I've heard that the kid actually doesn't want to sell his soul to Satan, and it's actually a good moral, and that Satan is really just depicted still as evil in this movie. So I don't really know what Christians are freaking out over with this movie. The more we freak out by things like this, the more we're actually hurting our witness. I've heard Christians even say things like, if they watch a movie with demons in it, that they're going to be possessed. And this stuff just doesn't make sense to me, especially if you're a Christian and you have the Holy Spirit in you. You can't be possessed. You're already possessed. You're possessed with the Holy Spirit. So why would you be possessed by a demon? In conversations, you're going to have this keep coming up. It's going to be more ammo for the non-Christians in every conversation we have about the occult. So is the Salem witch trial. So is any bad incident that Christians have been blamed for in the past. We need to address it, and we need to talk about it, and we should not forget it. I advocate for really looking in the stuff that we believe, including things like this, and make sure that what we're believing in isn't just hearsay or isn't just paranoia that other people have been saying for years. Make sure that these things are legitimate and that the evil that we're talking about is the true evil in this world and not just some lie that we've been believing for years just because it sounds like something we think Satan would do. If Satan's really doing something evil, I think the Bible gives us enough information to indicate where the evil really is, and that we don't need to look for a devil under every rock. Evil is evil. It's simple. It is right in front of us a lot of the times. And when it isn't, it's masquerading as an angel of light. And sometimes that's in our churches. Sometimes that's in places where we think we're doing good. And that's also in things we like. So have discernment. And just don't go off the rails with all this paranoia stuff. And God bless, peace out, and I'll see you in the next video.